Greetings. My name is Rich Frazee. I'm a member of ADEIL, the Association for Distance Education and Independent Learning. I'm here with Dr. Joshua Eyler, author of How Humans Learn, the Science and Stories Behind Effective College Teaching, which we've been reading in the ADEIL book discussion. We're really excited to continue our series of interviews with the author, and today we'll be talking about how failure relates to learning. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Now, there's just a wonderful quote about how mistakes help the brain spark and grow. Now, do you see this connected to the idea of desirable difficulties where struggle can help with learning, retention, or performance? Or is this sparking and growing another topic altogether?
No, I think it's part of it, certainly, and I do talk about desirable difficulties at some length in the chapter. I think so. First of all, let me I think explain in the larger sense what I mean by mistakes and what that quote means about sparking and growing, and then how desirable difficulties fit under that umbrella. And so, honestly, what we know from the biology of learning is that we have that learning, that making mistakes is a feature, not a bug. We actually have signal receptors in our brain that are designed solely for the purpose of detecting error and drawing cognitive resources to those errors. So this is something that we're built for. It's not something that our educational systems are built for, though, because the way this should naturally play out in the learning process, and I'm sure this is true for me, I'm sure it's true for you and many of the viewers as well. The way that we learn something is to try an approach, make a mistake, get feedback on it, and try again. That is the learning cycle, and yet our educational systems are not set up in that direction. They're set up to stigmatize failure, to give one shot at high stakes assessments, and to penalize making mistakes. So the mistakes, they spark and grow learning because they first of all, they allow us to identify what we need to know in order to advance our knowledge. There are opportunities to get feedback from the people who are teaching us, or the people we seek out, the resources we seek out to teach us, and then to grow from that. And we need that process. We absolutely do. And what I would say, I think the real point of that chapter is we need to design our courses and our systems better to account for that natural process. And that won't be easy, but it is necessary, I think. So how does that connect to desirable difficulties? That's a model of teaching, I think, that developed by Robert and Elizabeth Bjork, and it's simply that there are strategies that we can use to study, to learn in class, that make the learning more difficult at first, but it allows that material to be encoded in our memories more deeply and more accessible, in a more readily available fashion when we need it. And so retrieval practice is one of those. The testing effect, where you take small quizzes that both recall long past information and material that you just learned, and you're doing that over and over, and gradually you're learning more. Answer generation as opposed to looking at multiple choice responses. So that's really difficult to do right off the bat, but over time, that process will help you remember it and use it more effectively. My favorite is interleaving, and they did this great experiment with art history courses that I talk about in the book, where one group of students was learning about paintings from famous artists in bulk, in batches. So learn all, 10 of Van Gogh's paintings, 10 of Monet's paintings, etc. The other group was the interleaving group, and they would learn one at a time, one Van Gogh, one Monet, one Da Vinci, etc. And they were given a certain amount of time, and then they took a quiz after about an hour, I think. And the control group, the one who was learning in batches, they got an 80% on average, 80% on the quiz. The interleavers, the experimental group, got a 60%. Then they took it it's either a couple of days or a week later. I can't remember exactly. And the interleavers still got a 60%, but the block studiers got 20%, right? And so in other words, it's easier to learn in that way by block studying. And that is the way our students do it all the time. They cram in blocks. I'm going to try and memorize everything about this, then I'm going to move on to the next thing. Because that's easier to process at first, but we don't remember as much later on as we do if we use this interleaving strategy. So that's a part of the idea that mistakes and errors will spark and grow the learning process, because you make a lot of mistakes trying those strategies, and it's part of how we learn that material more deeply, though.
Nice. You touched a little bit on this. Your final words in the chapter on failure are provocative. If I may quote, "Let's all agree to get rid of grades." What do you say? Not impossible? Do you think that competency-based education focusing on skill acquisition is moving in the right direction? And what do you think it would take to get rid of grades?
Well, this is a very prescient question, because I'm working on a book on grades right now. And so it's something that is occupying every waking moment of my my thinking life, I think. So the answer to the first question, yes, I do think competency-based learning is moving in the right direction. I think there are more and less successful models of competency-based education, but to the degree that it prioritizes the pacing, an individual's pacing on the learning process, the making of mistakes and learning it from those mistakes, and also getting feedback rather than grades. To the degree that those models prioritize those three things, they are definitely moving in the right direction, because ultimately what the research says, we learn from feedback, not from being evaluated. If you think about anything that you're good at and how you got good at it, it was because of a lot of practice and a lot of feedback, not because you got, you got an A on your baseball swing when you were 8 years old, right? So that is kind of the core of what we know about how people learn. So competency-based models, standards-based learning, mastery learning, contract grading, specifications grading, ungrading, these are all progressive grading models that are moving, that while still giving grades, because it's hard, we have to give them unless we're working somewhere like St. John's or Hampshire or something like that. So while still giving a grade, it's moving away from the evaluative mechanism of grades and more toward prioritizing feedback throughout the semester. So in all of those models, the emphasis that the instructor places on the learning process is on the feedback that's given rather than the grade that eventually comes. I think the other feature that all those models share is that the only grade that ever comes is the one at the end of the semester, and it's after lots of feedback, lots of opportunities for revision, conferences with the teachers, self-assessment, peer assessment, lots of things we know that work to advance learning rather than evaluation. So those are real steps that people are taking within individual courses. And I think that is, if we care about learning, if we care about our students at from a bird's eye view, it's a direction that we have to take. From a systemic level, how can we do it? I think that's a much harder question because of how different institutions are from each other. Here's what I think. I think that the more, and we're already seeing this a little bit, the more colleges hear from employers that skills matter more than GPA, that will put higher ed in a position where they can begin to make tough decisions that weren't possible before, right? Because colleges, in many ways, the outcome is, okay, I need a GPA in order to get the job that I want, right? Or to get into the med school that I want, or law school, et cetera, right? But if the end point in that, the employers are giving feedback saying, yeah, I mean, okay, they're important, but then they're not the most important thing that we look at. That gives colleges a little freedom to begin to play around with some of these things. At the same time, one of the things I'm looking at in these books in this book is high schools that have moved away from giving grades, that have moved to narrative feedback or a standards-based model. And if on the front end, on the other side of colleges, if more K-12 models are doing that, then suddenly on both sides, you have a sandwich of pressure that I think can result in the ability to make decisions about evaluation processes and grades that will benefit students. I can see it happening institution by institution. Whether it ever happens over the broad swath of higher ed, that would be very hard to do. I don't know if it could happen, but I hope we take steps in that direction.
Wonderful. On a personal note, just because of the wonders that mistakes and failures do with learning, do you have any favorite mistakes or failures of your own that you'd like to share?
Oh my, so many, so many. I think I learned, here's the biggest one. And the one that I have learned the most from, and I think that has benefited my teaching career to no end. And that is when I first started teaching literature courses, I was replicating what I had seen and experienced in college, which was we do reading quizzes to make sure that people know what they've read, and we take exams where these exams are asking, who's the author, what's the title, identify this passage, and why is this significant to understanding the work as a whole. So I was doing that same thing. And I ran up against, in one medieval, that's my background, medieval studies, one medieval literature course I was teaching, I knew from the conversations I was having with them before class began, I knew that they had read the poem because they were referencing details that you could only know if you had read it or tried really hard to read it. It was a difficult poem, Pearl. And then I gave this reading quiz, and the grades were abysmal. If you hadn't had those conversations, you would have thought from the grades on the quizzes that no one had read anything. But I knew that that was not true. And at that moment, I knew I have to change this. This is not working because it's not allowing students to show me what they actually know and what they've actually learned. And so from then on, although I've gone through several models, I've switched entirely to a reading response mechanism where I ask interpretive questions. Now I do it on the discussion board of the LMS. I ask interpretive questions that they'll post responses to before coming to class. And to me, that engages with a lot more of what I hope they learn than reading quizzes. Same is true for the exams. I just was not set. This was a mistake of my pedagogy. I just was not satisfied with what I was seeing. Yes, they were able to, kind of pull that information out from memory and repeat back to me, I think, in many ways, especially with the significance part, repeat back to me what I had said in class. But that's not what I want people to take from literature. So I asked myself some hard questions. What did I actually want students to have acquired, skills that they could have acquired that they'll use 10, 20, 30 years from now? And it was really much different from what those exams were asking. So I changed that model as well and started to rely more on activities and assignments to demonstrate their learning.
Good. Well, our thanks to Dr. Eyler for sharing time and insights. Please join us again as we conclude our series of interviews on how humans learn.